Um, I am very happy to be here together with everyone, and I was very pleased to see some of the people who've come, some of whom I've worked with for quite a while, like Bob Silverstein, who's been giving advice on AFB, and also all the people that I've met now in Alameda who've been amazing to work with. So what I want to do today is to talk about how we've been working on changing beekeeping regulations and the history of that, starting in San Mateo and also working some in Marin and more recently in both Alameda, and we're continuing in San Mateo. And so to try to give people an idea of the different aspects of what's involved in trying to change beekeeping regulations and why I'm very hopeful for the future. So I wanted to start out just kind of giving you a couple of stories of when I first, how I first got involved in this, and why I think it's important for people to change beekeeping regulations. Can somebody explain to me how I can, maybe I just changed, okay. So I had the first complaint that I learned about was back in 2013 here in the city of San Mateo. And one of the beekeepers I knew had offered to catch a swarm, and it went into her neighbor's tree. And so she and her husband said that they'd be happy to pick it up for them. And rather than being grateful, the neighbor was horrified to discover that there were bees next door, and they'd been there for years, but they had had no idea. So they went and complained to code enforcement, and what they asked was, are they really allowed to keep bees? And code enforcement says this frequently, that, you know, that's what people ask when they call, are they really allowed to keep bees? And so the regulations in San Mateo, although they're not very restrictive for most people, were not allowed in the zoning area where they were. And so this beekeeper had to move them. And so as a result of this, we decided to form what we call the San Mateo Bee Legal. And I just wanted to compare that situation, how her neighbors reacted to her, compared with another beekeeper that I knew in Menlo Park, where they have no regulations on the books about beekeeping. So when I used to go over to her place, there were always kids over there visiting this beekeeper. They were inspecting the bees, they were sharing the honey, they were not scared. Their families were thrilled. Everybody was getting honey. The city arborist came by one day, picked up a swarm out in the tree outside, took it off to city property, and I guess he became a beekeeper too. And he arranged to declare that that Menlo Park would have an annual honeybee day and celebrate it with the city council. So, you know, these two different approaches to beekeeping regulations had a very different result. Okay, so I think of this as the hiding out approach versus sharing nature approach. So the old time beekeepers, when I first started in 2004 with beekeeping, told me that one should not let your neighbors know about your bees. You should just hide out, and all would be good. But I discovered that that wasn't the case over these years. People who were hiding out, they can't always hide out their bees, sometimes out them. And so that wasn't always possible. So we formed this Bee Legal project with the San Mateo Bee Guild. And I feel like we're now much more on our way to being more open beekeepers in our communities. And to me, that's a lot of what we're trying to do. So I'll share with you what we've learned over these last 8 years of trying to change beekeeping regulations, as well as work that I've done in other parts of the Bay Area, and seems to be continuing. And my vision, and I hope yours too, is that that our whole Bay Area can have this more open approach to keeping bees, where our communities are reconnected with nature, that we don't have so much fear of pollinators as people learn more. And I would say that our successes are, to my surprise, happening much more quickly these days as we have learned to be more effective. I'll start with what it was like in our county back in 2013, just to give you an idea. It wasn't so bad in some ways if you look at it in terms of area, but a lot of this area that is yellow, where I say beekeeping was legal, are areas where there were either no regulations on the books, or they said that bees were not considered to be um, venomous, but there was nothing that said anything about beekeeping. So we had 67% of the county, including county land, 14 out of 21 jurisdictions that used nuisance back then. But we also had these light blue, blue and red areas, and the dark blue and the red were very nasty. We had 19% of the county jurisdictions, 4 different locations, had either an effective ban or they had an actual ban on beekeeping. And I would just mention that sometimes it's not even in the regulations. 2 of those places had it in an administrative policy. So somebody could look it up and not even realize that it was effectively outlawed. So I've found that it can vary quite a bit in different places. We have 3 places that had lesser restrictions, 14%. So that was the situation back then, but some of our larger cities, not our largest, surprisingly, some of the larger cities, which are up to the north near San Francisco border, have larger populations, and they also use nuisance. So it wasn't a question that the largest ones used restrictions, but we did have some that were really quite bad. So what types of restrictions did, in these 7 cities where we were trying to change the regulations, did they actually use? So there's quite a wide variety. And I'm going to be showing you San Mateo now, and later I'll be explaining some of the other cities that, counties that use other approaches to restrictions. So in San Mateo, it really covered a wide variety. Including lot size, zoning, numbers of hives, setbacks, permits. And like I said, Foster City used a ban. So the less onerous regulations don't make it impossible to keep bees, but they can still be very problematic and difficult to live under as a beekeeper. Sometimes it's hard to site your bees properly on a lot, either safely or in a healthy way for your bees, or they restrict the number of hives, which can make it very difficult when you're trying to split and reproduce hives so that they don't die. So severe restrictions can become what I call an effective ban, and in many places, one example of that is requiring either very large lot sizes or even very large setbacks that can eliminate most of the city residents from beekeeping. So I started trying to learn about beekeeping policy at that point, so that we would have a good proposal when we tried to change. And that was actually time well spent. And I examined a lot of different beekeeping policies, got great input from beekeepers. But one of the things that was very, very helpful was that I did a lot of outreach to code enforcement. And I learned about the head of code enforcement in Elk Grove, actually from the state apiarist. and talked with him. His name was Shane Diller, and he also taught code enforcement in the local community college. And he did not like restrictive approaches. He thought they did not work well. They did not address the issues that needed to be addressed. And I loved his quote. He says, "Bees can't read zoning maps or see property lines. They don't have brands, so you don't know where they come from." So basically, restrictive regulations, I guess they make, city officials feel good, but they don't address neighbor complaints. And they're very ineffective at actually dealing with any problems that might come up with bees. Shane felt that cities should regulate the aspects of beekeeping that actually bother residents, and understand that they can't regulate bee behavior and they should leave good beekeeping to beekeepers. So then I tried to understand what was going on in these 14 jurisdictions that had nothing on the books, no mention of bees, and what did that mean, and what was going on. So as I said, 14 jurisdictions in the county didn't have any restrictions. Some said that bees were not considered venomous animals, and that eliminated them even further from some restrictions. So I learned, though, that no local regulation does not mean that there's no regulation and that there's nothing on the books, and that having nothing on the books can be problematic at times for cities and for beekeepers. So for the cities, beekeepers can at times create bothers for neighbors who can then complain when they don't take good care. And I'll be discussing some of those types of complaints later. And for beekeepers, cities can decide that they want to enact some new beekeeping restriction, and they can put into place uninformed restrictive regulations when there's nothing on the books. And sometimes it happens really quickly, and you have to, really organize amazingly quickly in order to respond. So that happened to us in Half Moon Bay, and it's actually happened in San Francisco as well. So, I do think that over time that there is an advantage to having something on the books as opposed to nothing on the books. We can discuss that. I'd like to, we finally came around to deciding that a nuisance approach was the better approach rather than these other restrictions that I outlined before. So let me give you a little bit more of a sense of what nuisance regulation is about, because it can be used in different ways. I'll share, 3 simple variations on it. So where Bob is from in Burlingame in 2000, and worked with me very hard on this. He gets as much credit as I do for our success in Burlingame. In 2018, they rescinded their beekeeping regulation, due largely to decisions by the city attorney, who was actually terrific. And Bob and I went and talked to her, and she told us that she didn't want local regulations, but that she did want, but that people who really had a problem always could resort to public nuisance at higher levels, like state nuisance law. And so it's not the case that if there's nothing on the books, there's still nuisance law. So no mention does not mean no regulation. And it does not mean, what it means is that there's no local regulation, but public nuisance regulation still applies. That's what she told us. So, but what we discovered was that most cities where we worked have been reluctant to totally rescind regulations and, come in accordance with, what was going on in most of the county in the 14 and later 17 that sorry, 14, later 15, that had no regulations on the books, and to rely just on state nuisance. So what happened was we started working in San Mateo in 2013, and it took us 4 years of trying to convince people and going through different iterations for them to come up with a regulation, which I would call a specific beekeeping nuisance. So we kept arguing that we wanted a nuisance approach, and they said they wanted examples of that. So we suggested provisioning water in advance and controlling the flyway so that the bees fly above the human zone, I call it, so that neighbors don't have bees crossing their driveway at 3 feet. So we said those were some of the most common, and why didn't they make that the regulation? And the lawyer insisted that she wanted, the city attorney, that she wanted also a specific nuisance regulation. And so she had a quite general nuisance regulation about beekeeping, that it should not create a nuisance. And then in Pacifica in 2020, and I think we have Ruby there from Pacifica in the audience. So and we had wonderful Pacifica beekeepers helping with that. We got this passed in Pacifica in the middle of COVID. It was amazing. So anyway, the beekeeping nuisance regulation on the books, so that if you look in Pacifica, it will say, this is it. All apiaries maintained for the purposes of keeping bees shall be kept in a manner that does not disturb the peace, health, or safety of the neighboring properties or community. So those are specific beekeeping nuisance regulations. Then there's another approach where you have a restrictive regulation, but you also have a nuisance regulation embedded in it. So this happened to us in Redwood City in 2016 when we campaigned. We had not been planning on it. It happened without our desire to move ahead, but they had an effective ban. Basically 99% of people in Redwood City could not keep bees legally. And we talked with the mayor, who told us that he was afraid of bees, but he knew that they were important. But he did not want to put into place a nuisance approach. And he refused to eliminate all restrictions. But the restrictions we finally negotiated were fairly minimal. A 25-foot setback from neighboring buildings. And since it was from the building and not the property line, it was more of a problem for side yards. And then he insisted on a hive limit, but we got him down to a 2-hive limit on a 3,000-foot lot. So there are not very many tiny lots like that. And beyond that, everything, any number was okay. So, but the nuisance conditions, keep this in mind for later, that were embedded in the regulation were interesting. They said, all hives shall be provided with an adequate and constant water supply, which is what we used in San Mateo. But it also said, a public nuisance shall be declared when bees are not kept in accordance with this article. So if you remember, the previous public nuisance were very broad. Don't create any kind of nuisance for your neighbors. This one restricts the breadth of what's a nuisance to the articles that are in the regulations. So that was an interesting variation on a nuisance restriction. So what I want to do now is to just show you for different counties. You've already seen this one from 2013. I just wanted to remind you that we had 67% legal at that time and 19% ban. We got down to 81% legal and a 10% ban. So we have made progress. We're still working on it. We have a current campaign in Foster City, which is the city that has a ban. We've had 5 campaigns since 2013, and I'll be telling you more about all of that shortly. Like now. So since nuisance, I find that now in the last couple of years, nuisance regulations are much more accepted as our campaigns have successfully adopted them. And so when cities want to change code, they go and look for what is the code in other places. And when there's nothing mentioned, they don't count that as a regulation. And but if you show them that we've had X, Y, and Z different cities that have changed their regulation and what they've done, then they see that, you know, what they're not putting in hive limits and setbacks and zoning. And so, as I said, in 2013, we started in San Mateo. We didn't succeed to change the regulations until 2017. In 2016 in Redwood City, 2018 in Burlingame, and then 19 to 20 held up a bit by COVID in Pacifica. And I want to mention that San Rafael was an interesting case in 2014, and I did help on that one as well. And that's in Marin, one of the largest cities. Is it the largest or the second largest? I can't remember right now. So what happened was there was very little notice, and most beekeepers didn't even know about it, that they had decided that they were going to put a very expensive permit on beekeeping, and it was going to be on very short notice. So there was a massive effort to organize. People came from San Francisco. We all contributed to signing, you know, petitions, and a huge number of people attended. And I sent a large memo explaining why I thought they should use nuisance. And so it was amazing. It actually succeeded in one night. That was the most impressive campaign I ever saw. But you also had city councilors who were willing to listen to that, and we don't always have that. So like I said, in Redwood City you have, and we had people in San Mateo who were also fearful. So you have to judge what the situation is. So now we have recently, in the last few months, multiple campaigns that have come up. There's other possibilities that I'm not even listing here, but they're not really underway in the same way. But we have one in an unincorporated Alameda County, and we've got a number of people on the line now on the call, on the Zoom, that are part of our Be Legal Alameda County group, who have done wonders to push that forward. It's looking very, very hopeful. And I'll show you the result of that in a little bit, the approach that we decided to take. Foster City and San Mateo County also moved ahead, and it was actually partly as a result of the city councilors who felt that a ban on beekeeping was not the current ones. Current city councilors felt that was a bad approach. And beekeepers worked very closely with the city and proposed the regulation that we had proposed for Alameda County. And both of those sound interested in those approaches. And I'm hoping that by at least the fall or the end of the year, we'll pass in those two places. And finally, I'm going to talk about a week ago tonight, Fremont City Council decided that they were going to reconsider beekeeping and other activities. So I wanted to highlight that one of the major lessons, in addition to moving ahead more quickly, isn't just the example of having other jurisdictions that are changing beekeeping regulations to nuisance approaches and not using these restrictive approaches. But I realized over time that our message has actually been changing. So in 2013, I'd say the message was more like, you know, we've looked at nuisance and rescinding regulations like we have in most of the counties, better for the bees and beekeepers, and it results in less complaints. But I think what the cities heard was that these beekeepers, even if the neighbors have valid complaints, they just don't want any regulation at all. So the cities wanted examples of beekeeping regulation, and they didn't see the lack of beekeeping codes as regulation. So nothing on the books didn't look like a way of regulating to them, even though we then discovered that nuisance law was still in place. So now we can say nuisance law is still in place, even if there's nothing locally on the books. And we didn't know that back then. So now in 2021, we make a number of different arguments. We say that nuisance regulation, we emphasize that more rather than nothing on the books. Nuisance regulation is the best approach because it addresses very specific complaints that neighbors might have. And we also talk about how we as beekeepers can help the city to respond to complaints more effectively and at lower cost. And I'll be discussing that in a few minutes. I also say that we can help with the code change process to make it quick and easy for them. And during COVID, with all the stuff they have on their plates, that is something that really resonates. And I think what the cities hear when we make that argument is a big thank you. Okay, I wanted to just go through quickly some of the approaches in other counties and cities. In San Francisco, it's a kind of a unusual approach. 100% of San Francisco city and county allows beekeeping, but bees are not regulated in the same way in San Francisco as they are in most Bay Area counties. In San Francisco, honeybees are exempted as a public health nuisance under their health codes. It's actually similar to New York City, where you may not know, but New York City, also beekeeping is legal and got changed. A side story, Rudy Giuliani imposed a beekeeping regulation, and then there was a campaign to change it back. So anyway, in New York City, you can keep bees, and it's under health codes. So in San Francisco, it's exempted as an insect. There are a range of noxious insects that are considered a health nuisance that include lice, scabies, fleas, bed bugs, and other things, mosquitoes, whatever, except for bees. So that's the only mention in the San Francisco code. Marin, I was actually very pleased when I went through all their regulations to discover that after San Rafael, 84% of Marin jurisdictions use a nuisance approach. Many of them don't have anything on the books. So that's 26 out of 31. And what Marin's approach is I said San Mateo had a whole range of different things, but Marin really is into permitting. And they have 4 out of 31 of their jurisdictions that restrict beekeeping with permitting, but then there are all these often very onerous restrictions that they have to meet in order to be able to get a permit, and then they often charge them an arm and a leg if they do fit. So there is one jurisdiction that has a ban on beekeeping. But anyway, there are some efforts, Novato and other places, to try to change those last 5. Okay, so in Alameda, Thank you to, first of all, Hannah, who started this whole effort to change beekeeping regulations. I'll explain that situation a little more later. And her husband, who compiled a lot of information on beekeeping regulations in Alameda, and then to Tom, who put together this map. So it is a little depressing, though, to look at the fact that unlike 2/3 when we were starting in San Mateo, or 80-something% in Marin, or 100% in San Francisco, that only 9 out of 21 jurisdictions in Alameda use nuisance. And I think there might have been some others that used to, but then regulations got imposed later. Well, we'd have to do that. Anyway, so more than half of Alameda jurisdictions are highly restrictive or have an effective ban. So it's pretty nasty in 11 out of 21 jurisdictions. And unlike Marin, which uses permits, a lot of these places use lot sizes, and very large lot sizes. So I don't know that you can actually see this or not, because it's a little, the numbering is a little small, but 1 acre, you need to have 1 acre, or you need to have 10,000 square feet or 6,000 square feet. I don't imagine that many places have those kinds of lot sizes. So they're not the only restrictions that are used in these jurisdictions or cities, but it is the one that kind of makes it impossible for people to be considered legal. You'll see that an awful lot of that is indeed unincorporated Alameda County, that large red area that doesn't have any number on the right side border. So if that actually changes, which we're hopeful about, this map will immediately start to look a whole lot better. The green ones are the ones that are, use nuisance, or light green uses less restrictive regulations. And I'll just point out that Fremont is number 6 down there at the bottom. So we'll be talking about Fremont shortly. Sorry. Oh, there it is. Okay. Okay. So there's a whole other approach to dealing with beekeeping complaints that, so you have a regulation, and then somebody complains. There are ways to respond to that we have found to be very effective. So the good news is that, and it helps us with changing regulations, is that beekeeping complaints are incredibly low. There are very, very few beekeeping complaints in most communities. Some places say they haven't had any for years. Some have only had 1 or 2. There in a year. It's really sometimes 3. I mean, it's nothing like dog barks. So the bad news is that even if you're the one who gets one of those complaints, it is much more difficult for a beekeeper who has to move their hives. And so unhappy neighbors can make your life really miserable. And sometimes they can publicize their complaints to make it really problematic for the larger beekeeping community. So we really want to keep beekeeping complaints under control. So I learned about good code enforcement responses from a few different places that used similar approaches, slightly different in each place. So the first one was that Elk Grove one that I told you about earlier that was so inspirational to me. So Elk Grove uses a beekeeping expert, is what they call it. They can decide who's the expert, and they use it to evaluate and advise when they've had a complaint, so they can evaluate whether it was a problem, and then they can advise what can be done correct it. Then I talked to beekeepers in San Francisco, the San Francisco Beekeeping Association, and they told me that code enforcement in San Francisco has the names of a couple of beekeepers informally on their list, so that when they get a call, they call that beekeeping expert that they have on call to resolve the issues. And most of the time it's worked quite well. I can tell you there have been some problems though. In Redwood City, one of our beekeepers in the San Mateo Guild was the chief of code enforcement. So he actually was tremendously helpful. And we worked with him to try to figure out how to resolve issues when they did get complaints. So out of that experience, we decided that we were going to do something a little bit more formal. And in 2015, we did a training of what we called beekeeping site evaluators, tried to have people who were in different parts of the county that could respond. And so this whole effort was under our Be Legal project. So we trained them. We reached out to the ag commissioner, the county extension officer, UC Davis, and also to a conflict resolution specialist who was really quite helpful to help us, have kind of breakout sessions where we could learn different ways that you could respond when people were having problems. So now that we've got people trained, we offer our services for free directly to code enforcement officers. We prefer to work in cities with nuisance-based regulations and not cities that have onerous restrictions, because people can't meet those. So what we do also, I think it's important to do this in association with the code enforcement officers or the sheriff or whoever, because what it does is it saves them time when you respond. And so they have less work. And then you give your evaluation, and then they, so you're not the one responsible. You're saying, I evaluate that there is or there isn't a nuisance. And then this is what I think should be done about it. And it's worked really well. We've had almost no complaints in 6 years. Most of the people who were trained have never had to go out on a call at all. All of the calls we've had have been resolved. The main ones had to do with provisioning water and controlling flyways. It could be, that you put up a fence just to, shield what's going on with the bees if somebody's scared. You just try to respond on both sides, make sure that the beekeeper is doing what they want to do, they need to do for their bees, and that the neighbor, that their concerns are being addressed. But I think it's important to note that we've also found that sometimes there's nothing to do with any nuisance, no bother being created by the beekeeper, that the problem is that the neighbor has some other issue unrelated to bees. And so it's really important that you don't have regulations on the books that are gonna make that an easier thing for the neighbor to do. So that is part of what I'm gonna talk about more later. Okay, so once you've got this all in place and you've got, you have gone from hiding out to being able to share nature with your community, it's really important, I think, for our beekeeping associations to start to really make an effort to educate our beekeepers to be good neighbors, to be responsive to neighbors' complaints, that's a high priority. Some people basically say they don't give a damn, and that is only going to create problems for the whole beekeeping community. So we really need to figure out how to respond to complaints. So, so beekeeping associations are really important in training new beekeepers and reaching out, to make sure that there aren't problems, and participating in the site evaluator program after a complaint is resolved. One can also train people with best management practices. I think that's something that's best done as an educational practice, and not as a regulation, because there are examples of best management practices being used as a regulation, and I don't endorse that, though I did evaluate it when we were first thinking about it. Anyway, my favorite example of a best practices book, well, I think it's about 16 pages, is by Anthony Melathopoulos up in Oregon, Residential Beekeeping Best Practices Guidelines for Nuisance-Free Beekeeping in Oregon. It is really very good. And so I would highly recommend it. And then finally, after educating our beekeepers and, changing our regulations and educating our beekeepers, then we can really kind of come out and talk to our community about what bees do and how important they are, and how we can create bee-friendly communities. I know San Mateo does, and I'm sure you do in Alameda too, do community education in many different ways, libraries, schools and classes and all sorts of things. And just to learn about bees. And then beekeepers themselves can teach their friends, neighbors, and other people that they meet about coexisting with bees. And it's remarkable, if you're able to be open with them, how they start really appreciating and reaching out. Oh, look, the other day I pruned my lemon tree and gave some of the lemons to the kids next door, saying that they could make a lemonade stand, which they were very excited about. And they got back in touch and said that they wanted to know where they could donate the funds from their lemonade stand so that it would benefit bees. And did I have any recommendations? So, those kids didn't know anything about bees when they first came, but now we can have community where they're really concerned about the bees. So then I always say that it is difficult to be a beekeeper these days, and I think it's more important to tell people not to be beekeepers, but to plant for pollinators. And so getting communities involved in addressing pollinator threats through things like planting for pollinators and other ways that they can learn about bees and bee threats and help. And one example is through the Bee Audacious, especially their 10 by 10 plus 10 project, where you plant a 10 by 10 strip and donate $10. Great way to outreach to the community. So some of the lessons learned: cities should be leaving beekeeping to knowledgeable beekeepers. We don't want to see restrictions that do not address complaints. Regulatory approaches should address legitimate complaints, and we feel that's best done through nuisance approaches. Beekeeping experts can help to resolve conflicts while educating the public and educating beekeepers. And finally, educating the public. Once the city code is bee-friendly, we can create a community more closely tied to nature and willing to promote pollinators. In the end of this, I'd like what I'd like to do after this is to see if we can have a little conversation and feedback from all of you. But I want to tell you a little bit more about what's going on in Alameda so that you know as efforts proceed to try to change regulations in Alameda. So when we went to unincorporated Alameda County, when Hannah had this problem with her neighbor, one of those examples of a neighbor who was not really complaining about the bees, but such an onerous restriction required her to move her bees. It was a very sad situation. Anyway, we connected up with the county sheriff through the help of this great group, Hannah, Sue, Tom, and a variety of other people. And Jim, you did help too, and so did Jerry. So anyway, the county sheriff, we had a couple of meetings with her and higher ups in the Alameda County um, government, the county sheriff's boss and everything. And we proposed this nuisance approach, and they were very open to it. And so that would change from an effective ban to a nuisance-based regulation. And the sheriff wanted something on the books and not rescinding. So we went back and looked at some of the San Mateo County approaches and decided to combine two different things. One is these two major nuisance complaints that, you know, are easy to put on the books and that take care of almost all of the complaints that come up. So it's a regulation that requires beekeepers to provision water in advance and to control the flyway. And then we looked back at the Redwood City nuisance clause and realized that if we did something that was more narrowed in scope, it would be there would be less opportunity for these contentious neighbors who were not really complaining about bees. And so we took the nuisance clause from Redwood City and said that if they fail to comply with provisioning water and controlling the flyway, then that would be considered a nuisance. So it narrows the scope of nuisance. And so we decided that that was actually better than rescinding. I hope in the discussion that the Alameda Bee Legal Group and others of you who've been involved will chime in and introduce yourselves. I did want to mention what happened, a little bit more about what happened last week in Alameda County in Fremont. The Fremont City Council, we discovered by accident, had agreed to review actually a goat keeping regulation, but the city councilor, Jenny Kassan, I think it's pronounced, added in that she thought that livestock regulation could be reviewed as well at the same time. And so this person, non-beekeeping person, somehow got my name and got in touch with me, and we looked through it, and it was terrific to meet some of the Fremont beekeepers. I want to particularly call out Richard Godfrey. Hello, we're meeting for the first time. And anyway, so we finally agreed that we would ask them to also look at the rules for beekeeping. And so in the city council last week, they decided to look at revisions to beekeeping, goats and chickens. I don't know if anything else will come up. And so I think they're calling themselves Bee Legal Fremont. I'm not sure, but I'm there to support them. And we'll be working on a memo to submit why we think a nuisance-based approach is good and provide wording for what we prefer. and we'll all work on that together to make sure that it's what everyone wants. We hope the staff and city councilors will support it. I am hopeful after listening to the city councilors that they will. I don't know the staff yet. I'd say it's a very good situation in Fremont because this goat campaign, it has a huge amount of support. And so I've not had this kind of situation before, but I think it's a good one, where, you know, these different people who have chickens and goats and bees can help each other and support the changes across the board. So I think that that's all very hopeful. We will definitely keep everyone notified if we need help along the way. If things look like we need more, the city council to and the staff to realize that there's a lot of public support, then we try to reach out to all of you in the ACBA, as well as other beekeepers, goat and chicken keepers, gardeners, environmentalists. Children are always great, and any others in Fremont or elsewhere who maybe are honey lovers are willing to support. If you have any skills or contacts in Fremont, do let us know, and we'd really appreciate any help. So what I'd like to begin with here is that if there's any conversation that we could have now, questions that you have, anything you want to clarify, if we got anything wrong and you want to correct it, it's not impossible that we could have gotten something wrong. So anything, I would welcome to start a conversation about changing regulations in Alameda as we work on changing them across the Bay Area ultimately.
Okay, I'm up. I just briefly want to thank Nickie first for her presentation, which is great, but especially for helping out in Fremont. Your timing was impeccable, and you know, it may take time. The other thing I wanted to share is this coming Saturday, Phil Staub has set up a meeting for the Fremont Beaks. And so anyone who's part of that group, it's real important that we try to work together. I think we'll be more successful if we do that for many of the reasons that Nickie's just shared with us, which is really what it's all about, is sharing nature. I love the way that you express that. And so anyhow, come Saturday to the Stone Garden over on Mowry and Mission if you're free. Nickie, you're obviously invited, but we know you probably have a busy schedule. And thank you so much for working with Fremont. It's really helped a lot.
What time was that, Richard?
Say again?
What time?
I believe it starts at 4, and Phil Staub has that info if you email him, but I think it's from 4 until 6:30.
I think it's 4 to 7, and it's potluck.
There we go.
Yeah.
Of course.
It's the same one you went to last year, Sue.
Stonehead, what is it?
It's called the Stone Garden, but you know, we won't be using any herbs. It's a pretty straightforward group with a lot of beehives. It'll be a lot of fun.
Yes.
It's on the corner of Mowry and Mission Boulevard.
It's behind, there's a veterinary clinic there, and that's actually the name. It's Dr. Stone is actually.
Oh.
Yeah, I know. It's kind of little misleading, but yeah. Yeah, thank you for presenting at that meeting the other night. That was very nice, Nickie.
Oh, good. Yeah.
I have one comment in support of some things you've said before. Those people who go out and collect swarms are ambassadors for the bees, so they should use that opportunity. Please say things that are true. And I also like to thank all of the people who have done in the past or will in the future go to do the booth at the county fair, because that's another opportunity for community outreach. And the better they think of us, the smoother things should go for us and our bees.
That's exactly what happened with Foster City, is that one of these a couple of the city councilors went to the booth at the county fair, and their kids were like crazy about the observation hive and learned all this stuff. And then we have these maps showing Foster City banning beekeeping. And so the city councilors were stunned, and ultimately that's why they worked on changing it. Bob, you have anything else to say about that? Not really? Oh, I think you're muted. You're muted.
I got it now.
Okay.
My wife prefers it that way. No, I'm just kidding. Yeah, I saw an article in the local Burlingame Patch magazine, the little throwaway paper, that discussed the Foster City ban and noted that there was only one city councilor who voted against even bringing it up for discussion in front of the council. So yeah, I just picked up my typewriter or my keyboard and I wrote him a nice letter.
It was a very nice letter.
And he actually responded and wanted how to, turns out he essentially knew nothing about bees, only that he was worried that neighbors would be upset with each other, and they would have no way, if the restriction was taken away, to deal with the problem. So I tried to explain, but that was a week or so ago, and I have not heard back from him. So we'll see how that goes.
I think that's a great way. It's kind of like what you said, Jerry, being an ambassador and trying to educate people and reach out. And that's exactly what Bob did. And I think it can only help. So, Bob reaches out, other people reach out. They educate him, because some of the things he said when he wrote to Bob were like stunning in what he didn't realize, that bees didn't just live in their hives. He didn't seem to realize that they flew anywhere. So, you don't know what people do and don't know. So.
When your grandchild or child wants you to do a show and tell, do it. You'll be educating a lot of students too. You had a link, I think, in one of your pages to a best practices document from Oregon. Can you please share that link in the chat?
I will figure out how to do that. Yeah.
Or send it around.
Yeah.
And perhaps we can add it to our website.
If I have a link on it and I just copy it, will it work? Or
Yeah.
Better if I. Oh no, that's not working. Okay, I'll get it. I'll get it and I'll get it up there.
Thank you.
Actually, if you just Google best practices beekeeping Oregon, it comes up first.
I know it totally comes up right away, but I'll still find it. Anyway.
I'm currently a student at Cal Poly, and there's basically an effective ban in the entire city of San Luis Obispo on beekeeping, where you have to have bees 200 feet away from the street in order to keep a hive.
Right.
And I'm trying to.
That was Pacifica.
Yeah. So I'm trying to get hopefully something going, trying to change people's minds, but
Is Jeremy Rose down in San Luis Obispo?
He is, yes. He's a professor at Cal Poly for the beekeepers.
Yeah, so he comes to mind as someone who would help.
For sure. I'm just wondering, because a big reason why that they kept this ordinance in place is because their argument is that they have to spend so much money on responding to these the swarms and such, and they have to send people out to address them. And I was wondering if you had any response to that, because or any experience with similar arguments.
I think around here, and Jerry was just talking some about it, but Alameda is like a primo example of a wonderful response to swarms, but so is San Mateo County. So I am surprised, because usually what they say in the cities where we've worked is that you guys are great on collecting swarms and we don't have to spend any money at all, and you guys do it all. And so they don't usually have any complaints about, they actually think of that as a real pro. But Jerry, have you ever heard of any place where?
About the only reason I could think of that San Luis Obispo might be concerned is that you guys have Africanized bees down there. I don't know how many, how
It's
big of a
a
problem.
minority population. It's like 18 to 20%.
Okay.
But they also don't have a really good active bee club, and they've got some, what I like to call crunchy old members who are very down on, you know, moving the needle at all, and support, you know, don't ask, don't tell.
Yeah, I
and,
tried
and
to ask. I was like, hey, how do I register my bees with the county? And immediately they were like, you can't have bees. And then everybody responded, but if you don't ask, don't tell, then you can keep them. I was like, okay, so that's great.
So when you're in hiding, there's no way to have a collective club that actually educates members how to spot swarming before it happens, how to, you know, get a swarm line going, et cetera, and promote, you know, how do you spot your hive is turning into an Africanized hybrid hive? And how do you know, do you make queens locally available to requeen those hives, blah, 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 blah. So, you know, it's hard.
It sounds like there's a bit of a political problem there that might be dealt with by political forces, namely organizing a group of members in that club to actually replace the current management.
Yeah, perhaps. I know that some member, when I encouraged people to come to this talk and like hear what you guys had to say. And somebody responded with worries about liability insurance and the people being liable for, because 4% of the population is allergic to bees down there. And so they were worried about homeowners being liable for people having allergic reactions to bees.
That might not be an accurate statement. They're just,
No, they said that people's liability plans have been terminated because of it. But you have no experience with that being true?
No, I mean, it's just like, you can't say what bee stung you. Like,
But the one
Hives don't
I had
sting.
the same experience in
I think it's not
town of San Lorenzo. The library wanted to have a bee. Since I am known like a local beekeeper, I know they San Mateo County, city of San Mateo library, they have a bees.
yeah, no, we have a wonderful beekeeper who set that up. It's amazing. Well,
Right.
them worked on it.
So they saw that, so they love to have the bees, but exactly the Molly said, same thing came up, said at the end, it's got rejected by the county supervisor's office, saying that the liability issue, if anybody gets stung and so forth, then they don't want to be liable for that, all the issues. So for that reason, they declined the having the bees in the library.
Well, you know, in San Mateo Library, as I understand it, they don't send people up to the roof to see the bees. They have a video that goes down to an area in the library for the kids. And they have a whole display there that teaches them about bees. And then you can see the bees coming in and out, or maybe whatever they have their video on. So there isn't any liability at that San Mateo library. I mean, the Redwood City Library.
Yeah.
And the reason that they did that thing at the library was because they were so impressed when we changed the beekeeping regulations. That's when people can start to, you know, do something, is that, you know, you change those beekeeping regulations. And the head librarian was like, oh, that's wonderful, and let's teach everyone about it. As for, anaphylactic allergies, part of the problem is that a lot of people are really don't have an anaphylactic reaction. And they confuse a local
A localized reaction.
toxic reaction to a bee sting with an anaphylactic reaction. And there are definitely things that can be done for people who do have an anaphylactic allergy. And so we actually the beekeeper who started the hive at the Redwood City Library, she's allergic. She's truly allergic. She's a beekeeper. We have a number of beekeepers who are allergic.
Sure.
And
Find an allergist. I'm off now. Can you hear me?
yes, we can.
Yeah. So allergists, if you have a true allergy, an anaphylactic reaction, allergists are trained to mitigate that through what's called subcutaneous injections of small amounts of bee venom, and then titrating that up, and that treatment will prevent other anaphylactic reactions from occurring. So that's the treatment you're talking about.
And then they should also carry an EpiPen with them if they're really allergic.
Yeah. Okay. And
there was one other thing about in Burlingame, the old curmudgeons also, the old curmudgeon beekeepers also contacted me when I, working with Nickie. I was kind of put in the head because I live in Burlingame, and I got all kinds of messages from older beekeepers saying, keep your head down, don't stir the pot. And then after it was all said and done, one of the comments by the city council member was, we are so glad that some group has come to us and actually wants to do things legally. And, because everybody else that's coming to the city council is asking for, sketchy or semi-legal things to be approved. But, our goal is to be legal and not to be hiding, but be out there and educate, like Nickie says. So actually,
well, I know some of those old curmudgeons too, and some of them are good friends of mine, and they've told me that when I started, they really thought it was a terrible idea, but they've changed their mind.
That's true. Yeah.
So just stick with it.
Yeah, I mean, you can get to be really good friends with curmudgeons.
Oh yeah. Okay.
To that subject, besides the potential political approach in San Luis Obispo County, is there a county fair that has a bee booth or could have a bee booth? And typically these are run by the bee club, but that doesn't necessarily have to be the bee club doing the bee booth.
That's true. I'm not aware of that. I'm thinking of starting a bee club for on campus for Cal Poly students, just as a start, because I know that there's a lot of students who are interested in it. And I don't know how we've had a bee program for 60 years, but no bee club at Cal Poly. So hopefully we can get some organization through that. And I think if you put a young, spry face on beekeeping, people might be pretty responsive to it too.
I do think it matters. When we were in San Mateo, we went to the College of San Mateo, and it had become a bee city, a bee campus USA. And I got them to write letters and show up, and like it does make a difference, to have younger people come and speak up. So yeah, if you don't have an organization already, you're wise to think of forming a new organization that could spearhead it. In New York City, it was gardeners who spearheaded it. It wasn't beekeepers.
Yeah. Okay, so you guys have the Bee Legal team. What was the origins of that? Who started those programs?
I started it.
You started Be Legal. So what did you?
I asked for some people to join the committee. And so for a few years, we were doing things like figuring out the policy stuff. That actually took quite a long time. And so having that policy research done, I think is just another big help to everybody, you know. So, you know, for
But
example,
for our club, the board has decided that the info at Ronnie would actually designate who would be dispatched to the sheriff's department to assist in assessing a complaint in unincorporated areas of Alameda County.
Okay, great.
Just one more comment going back to the Africanized bees, aggressive bees, however you want to put it. That's not legal to raise your own queens in Southern California because of the breeding them will potentially, there's a lot of drones around that can create more Africanized bees. So queens are pretty much obtained from outside of the Southern California area because of that reason. I'm not sure how, I know that's true in San Diego, not sure how far up the state these restrictions are.
Is that true for insemination too?
Well, it depends if it's a research project or not and what they're looking for. But if you're getting your sperm from a non-Africanized area, I guess you can do that. But I'm not sure exactly on the regulations. But as part of the California Master Beekeeper program, there's a woman down in Southern California who's involved in queen rearing and teaching about how to, you know, rehive Africanized hives with queens from outside that are non-Africanized by breeders outside of the area. Her name is Palenque. I think Monica Palenque. But
Monica Palenque. Okay, that's great. I'll look into her.
I'll get you. My email is robertsilverstein@email.com, not Gmail, and I can get you her exact name if you send me an email.
Okay, will do. Thank you so much.
Yeah, I mean, I would also do the research on what the regulations are.
It's so hard to find.
I know, but I just called and looked up, and you know, sometimes they didn't tell you, and you had to find out from somebody. And it's maybe you can get some people to help with that, you know, divide it up.
That's the hope, for sure. Okay.
Maybe someone at school.
There would seem to be a couple members. So there's the Central Coast Beekeeping Alliance, and so there's some counties like Nipomo, or some cities like Nipomo, and more coastal places where beekeeping is legal, but the more inland places like San Luis Obispo are they have basically an effective ban. But I think it's more run by the county ag department and these more commercial beekeepers not wanting the nuisance or the complaints of the urban beekeepers messing up, hobbyist beekeepers messing up their reputation for whatever reason.
They have a monopoly?
That's a new one on me. It does vary from place to place.
It does.
Yeah. But anyway, sounds like a really important effort. And like I said, I think that you'll find that people will come around. You might want to choose your battles and try to go for a place where you're more likely to have some success. So, you know, if there's a place that just looks politically awful, I wouldn't start with that.
Yeah. Okay. Fair. Good advice.
I mean, we decided to leave Foster City for the end, and it's pretty close to the end right now. And, you know, over the years, there've been articles written about how disgusting they are for having this ban on beekeeping and all this stuff. And then finally, you know, like some of our beekeepers convinced some of the new city councilors. And so the times can change.
Mm-hmm.
I had the same thing in San Mateo City, where I had somebody on the sustainability commission of all things who just wouldn't support us, and it was coming up before them. And I swear he was afraid of bees. I took a kid, I took one sort of like a godchild, you know, like to the meeting, and he said afterwards, I thought I was going to hate this meeting. I thought it was going to be so boring. He said, but that was really interesting. And I think that guy was really scared of bees. And I do think that that's part of it. So the guy left the Sustainability Commission, and I immediately wrote a memo and started the campaign. And within months, we passed it.
So starting a campaign by starting circulating memos is the way to get on the agenda?
No, it's different in every single place. I was already, you know, kind of in the system in the city of San Mateo, and people kept saying, why aren't you putting your proposal forward? And I kept thinking, until you get rid of that guy, I'm not doing it. No, so it depends.
So you have to identify somebody in the jurisdiction who can kind of lead you down the right path.
Well, every place is a little different, you know, like if you can find a champion, that always helps.
Mm-hmm.
Somebody in a decision-making position.
Well, so I went to a city council meeting because I was told that the issue of beekeeping was going to be brought up at a recent meeting, but it wasn't. But it seemed like they had a process for the public getting certain issues on the agenda, and they also made it very clear, like, we are the people who, if you email us, we are the ones that receive the emails, and we are responding to you. So I think I definitely need to get on outreach to these individuals and try and understand their logic, and start convincing them of bees are a positive thing for the community. Even the state of California has deemed them like they are a economically beneficial species to California, and we need to preserve them and all that.
Well, Jerry, you asked whether we start with a memo. Well, it depends on the place. And Bob and I did coffee with every single city councilor in Burlingame before we ever got to that point. And so, you know, at that point, we had a sense, they're not allowed to talk to each other very much. I think only two people can talk at a time. What's the rule called again? Do you remember? Anyway, there's this thing that so that politicians
conspire, whatever. So they can't conspire against.
Right. So if you talk, they can talk to one other person on the city council, but they can't talk to two. And, you know, and so you kind of figure it out, or maybe they can talk to two, but whatever. And so we would go, and I did this in every single place, and I would get to know each of the city councilors before we ever went to any meetings. And then I'd have some idea of whether they were going to support us when we went or not. I would ask them, you know, tell them that what we were trying to do.
Yeah.
But, you know, we haven't had to do that in Alameda at this point. You know, it's been interesting to me that the process has been quicker here.
One wonders to what extent the staff of the a city council person has an influence on the program versus the city council person influencing the staff.
It depends on the city. Yeah, it can go either way.
Yeah, so in any jurisdiction, you have to find your way in, and that's the difficult part.
Okay.
Yeah, but
I
I
put the name of that woman in the chat of
I
the,
saw that.
okay. So
Karen.
now
Okay.
I had a name completely wrong.
You got it. So anyway, we had to do all of that kind of work initially, but in Pacifica, beekeepers were really well connected, and the mayor was very favorably inclined. And so that actually went fairly quickly.
Well, here in Alameda County, Hannah had gone to a couple of city council meetings in her unincorporated area and brought the issue up and got no traction. And then she brought it up to the club, and we decided we would, have a small force show up and support and talk about it. And then we started getting traction.
Yeah, that's me. Hi guys. Oh,
Good, Hannah.
it's so dark in here. Sorry, I sit in the dark. I'm so glad. Oh, yeah, I am. I'm so glad I brought it to you and you helping so much. God, I couldn't believe it can happen. But a question: where we are now? They didn't forget about us?
No.
Just checking.
I think the city attorney is dealing with it right now, right? Or the county?
Well, they want a description of how dispatch is going to happen. I think I emailed you about that.
That's what you were just talking about.
Right.
I don't remember. I didn't get any email. Okay.
No, I emailed Nickie because I didn't know how to write that up. They want a written description of how dispatch would happen.
And is it in the planning department now, or in city councilor or county councilor?
I think it is the city attorney. Somebody in the city attorney's office wants to see the workings of the dispatch.
Okay.
Okay.
I guess he wants to know if there's an issue, will he find somebody in a timely manner? So he's asking for probably some sort of a
A
commitment.
proposal, right. Yeah, right.
Sounds fair.
I should mention that we had a code enforcement officer, head of code enforcement, come to San Mateo right before I did that campaign, finished off that campaign. So she was probably 2016 or so she came. And she came from Fremont. She was the Fremont code enforcement officer. And she was the one who said, oh, we have a system. And then she told us the same thing. We have a system where we call on they said that what they did was they told the beekeeper who got a complaint that they had to pay for a beekeeping expert to come and evaluate. I don't know if that's still the case or not, but that was what they used to do in Fremont. We could ask her. She's still in San Mateo. She lives in Fremont. Anyway. Hannah, I know it's frustrating right now, but I do think it will move ahead. I mean, they were very positive. So
I hope
always
some reassurance from them that they didn't forget about us. So they didn't put us
they're not.
aside for some other issues. I don't know.
No, they contacted us late last week. So
just Sue, please keep me posted.
Yep.
So I feel better. Okay. And you have a wonderful daughter. I hope my kids one day join me too. Oh God.
So Hannah, what is the situation? Did you have to move your bees? Is that what?
It's complicated. It's complicated.
Okay. We
All
didn't
my
talk.
neighbors, they were so, my neighbors, they were so upset that happened. They said that we have so many fruits, we have so many vegetables, it's such a nice, they pollinate
Realize
everything.
your fruits and vegetables have to be pollinated by bees
yes,
or
yes.
some kind of pollinator in order
Yeah.
to produce fruit, right?
Yes, people,
No, but
some
these were
people,
the-
they more in plants and fruits and vegetables, and some people, they more just in the buildings, in concrete, and
Mhm.
like that person who I said, I have a tree, avocado tree right here where you want to put a fence. And he said, oh, this is just a tree. So for me, it's like, oh, that's tree. I grew it from little one. You know,
Yeah, no, so what happened with Hannah that I thought was wonderful and is part of that sharing nature thing is that she got this neighbor who had whatever issue and decided to make a complaint to be nasty. And all the other neighbors, there was a requirement that you have, I think was 10,000 square feet or something. So the other
one
neighbors,
acre, yeah, and they signed sign a paper that if anything that they asking to consider their property into that 1 acre, so I
They
can
said that-
keep my bees.
I thought that that was pretty remarkable to have your neighbors support you in that way.
I
That's
have
amazing.
very good neighbors. This is a new neighbor who came. He wasn't here for.
Oh, so your neighbors said it's okay to add their property onto yours?
Yes,
That's
yes,
cool.
and they sign it.
To
They
meet the
sign it right
minimum lot
away.
size.
Wow, that's sweet. That's a good idea. I wonder if I could do that. I like that.
Kind of
'Cause I'm
community beehives
obvious-
now.
I'm like, oh, you've been there. You were there Saturday, Hannah, but I would be considered grossly
Illegal.
No, I have
Yeah.
wonderful neighbors. We doing the block parties. We watching for each others. It's just like very good neighbors.
Oh, that's a good one.
I'm glad I'm in this neighborhood.
Yeah, that's a great idea. I think I got to go do that. I think I got bottles of honey I got to give away pretty soon.
It can be a loophole.
Honey for your vote,
We
please.
giving honey each other. We giving everything like fruits, vegetables,
Right.
eggs. We have one neighbor who has eggs, chickens and eggs. So we just share.
Okay.
Yeah.
I like that. That's a great idea.
So
That's a really good idea. I really like that one.
the neighbors are the ones who came up with the idea.
Really? That's really cool. I like that.
Yeah.
I need to talk to my neighbors. So.
They were very supportive. Very.
Oh,
very.
that's fantastic. Wow. That's a good one, actually. That's a really good one.
Well, if you get it all, changed and you don't have any of those restrictive regulations anymore, you can still be friendly with your neighbors, but you
Oh,
don't
yeah.
have to play
Oh,
those.
Yeah, but it's not like not all your neighbors are going to want to keep bees anyway. But a lot of people want bees around, but they don't want to do it themselves, So that's actually a good solution for things.
They were very friendly before that, and they still friendly.
That's great.
Yeah, gee, that's a great story. Well, you're not done yet, but it's still a good story. Oh, does that make it legal in the city now that if they've allowed you to consider their property as part of?
I don't think they did accept that, did they?
I don't know. I don't.
No, Hannah, you didn't put that forward to the.
No, I didn't put that forward. It was that time I moved my bees when it happened.
Mm.
So
Oh, so you already moved your bees?
I moved it, and then they just said we can consider. So it's a long story. It just goes in and out. It's just complicated.
It's
Yeah.
complicated.
Complicated. Yeah.
All right.
I wonder if you could still try and say, hey, if you make any progress, like my neighbors are letting me, saying that they are totally fine with this and that meets your land requirement. Can I relocate my hives to my property?
I hope we'll get resolve our problem before that.
Yeah, that's
I just hope
Yeah.
so.
Right. Okay.
Wheels of government grind slowly.
Mhm.
Oh yeah.
They sure
Especially
do.
these days, there's a lot on people's agendas. So you kind of have to work with people. Ask.
Yeah, the Fremont meeting was, to show you how slow things go, the Fremont meeting was not about beekeeping. It was about whether they were going to consider talking about beekeeping. It
Well,
was-
exactly. But now it's on the agenda.
Yeah, so they were deciding whether or not they wanted to put it on the agenda. It was like, oh my God. So things do move slow.
Well, an adaptation of your style of um, um, boilerplate by Fremont would probably be a good thing for any other jurisdiction, including the county. If Fremont gets to it first, for instance.
They've already agreed that in the county, that they like
Okay.
the wording.
Was
And
Rich the one who got the bee thing on there on the agenda too? Because I don't know
Sorry.
how it got on there. Or did you put it on the agenda?
Fremont?
Yeah.
No. Somebody heard about me from one of the unincorporated Alameda staff who was in one of the meetings.
Okay.
I don't know how this all happened. And
So-
so this person who's not a beekeeper got in touch with me and said, this issue about goats is they want
Right.
to change the goat regulation.
So Jim, those were Spencer's goats, Spencer Hadley's goats.
Yeah, that's what I heard.
Yeah.
The little kid, what was her name?
I don't know. I thought they kind of pushed that a little too far. I mean, like everybody wants to hide behind their children. So I think
Well, it seemed to be
Well, it's
working.
she's a bright girl.
Well, I mean, it's part of the 4-H thing. So, I mean, that's a big deal for the 4-H kids to be able to keep a goat in their backyard.
Yeah. So anyway, they were very excited.
Yeah.
And then I don't know why the city councilor expanded it in her request for reviewing the goats and said, let's look at the broader animal control livestock issue.
I wouldn't be surprised if Rich Godfrey didn't put it up.
No, he didn't initially.
Really?
He thought
He's
that
pretty active in the city.
Yes, he is. And
Very
we ultimately had a whole discussion about it. And then everyone decided to move forward. So, yeah.
Yeah, he and I were talking like the week before or something about it, and he brought it up. It's like, wow, okay.
Is there anything happening in Contra Costa County that would be interested in?
Who's in Contra Costa County? Is it Sung? Are you in Contra Costa?
Well, Sung lives in the Castro Valley too. I did announce it to at least some of the Mount Diablo club people, but it looks like none of them that I can recognize are at this meeting, so we don't know.
Yeah.
I was just wondering if you heard anything.
That was happening a few months ago, but I haven't heard anything more.
Yeah, we did a presentation to the San Ramon City Council, Planning Commission.
Yeah.
And again, it was just a meeting for have a look into and then looking into other cities and so forth. So it was just the start opening the conversation, just like then afterwards that I don't know what anything else happened since then.
Was what's his last name?
Well, Mike Vigo used to live in Lafayette or Moraga, but he moved to Alameda County, and he has been a past president of the Mount Diablo Club, but he's not here anymore. He was in the session earlier, but he's gone.
Right. He's been participating in the unincorporated Alameda County group. And so I know that he knows about what's going on. It just sounded like things were not moving forward in Contra Costa right now.
I was surprised to see, I was just Googling the web and on American Fall Brood, and actually Contra Costa County, there's actually a section on the county website talking about American Fall Brood and dealing with it and telling you how to burn hives and places to go.
Yeah, don't remember.
No, I mean, I'm sorry, that's a little side thing from this, but you
Yeah.
mentioned Custer County. Sorry, I didn't mean to pull the subject away.
No. All right.
I live in
Hi, Bob.
Contra Costa County. And I've moved my hives out of Alameda County because of the diseases. And when I did have a neighbor complain, the codes in violation people heard my explanation of the agricultural code of California 29000. And the city lawyers decided that that the law supported me, and that was the end of it.
Well, I'm impressed they were willing to do that.
What jurisdiction in Contra Costa County are you in, KO?
Contra Walnut Creek.
I see.
So did you say that you thought Alameda County had diseases and Contra Costa didn't? Is that what I
In
heard?
my neighborhood, in my neighborhoods where my apiaries were in Alameda County, were constantly being robbed. And I kept on getting fall brood from the overpopulation of bee colonies in the neighborhood.
Wow.
And I had my nursery and my queen raising nursery, and they kept on killing my queens, and I was getting back to 4-year queens, and I just gave up. So I just closed all my Alameda apiaries and moved back to Walnut Creek, where people have planted trees of America. And so now there's enough pollen to keep them there all year. I used to have to move them out in June, but now they're doing well out there so far. And I haven't lost a hive in 3 years.
Wow.
But I
Impressive.
don't know anything about beekeeping because I've been doing it too long.
That's a good way to put it.
What? I have to sit back and shake my head on that one.
So another argument that I've been running into is that by encouraging people to keep bees, it's gonna result in an increased population of feral hives. And
Is that a problem?
so there are feral hives in San Luis Obispo, and like they come from the Laguna Hills and the Irish Hills. Like there's a forested area up there, but I don't understand. Like it seems like it's already a problem, and I don't think that keeping the feral hives entering people's neighborhoods or yards or dwellings, basically, like moving from the preserved areas into home structures and things like that, and then needing to be removed by the city. So I don't know like any argument other than like that just doesn't happen.
I don't think that's
I'd like to respond to that. I'd say the Alameda Beekeeping Association, because we're here, we capture a lot of those swarms before they become extractions. So like even on next door, I have all these people who say, well, just let the swarms be. I'm like, no, you have to capture them, because if you don't capture them, they can't enter other people's residence. But because you don't have a beekeeping association and you don't have beekeepers who are readily there to capture the swarm, then the swarm do enter residents' houses and become a problem, and then residents have to pay for extraction. So I would counter that argument with saying, hey, you actually had a beekeeping association that would capture the swarm, they wouldn't be a problem.
Yeah. Okay, good.
And I'd like to say, show me the money. I mean, they can say
No,
that
they
it's cost them
it
money.
has. There was an increase. I read it in an article somewhere that it had raised from
An article?
they
Or a
the
city post.
agricultural commissioner's office replied to people's wants to change the beekeeping ordinances with stats that they had spent. Let me see if I can find it.
But I think Mimi's argument is right, that if you're capturing
Yeah,
the
totally.
swarms,
Before it's
they
yes.
won't.
From 2006, they spent close to $4,000, and then in 2010 they spent 15,000.
But that could be one extraction, right, Jerry? Like to do one construction patch job.
Bob Beatty is here. He could actually comment on doing extractions. In my time spent answering swarm hotline calls, have not been acquainted with the city or county at all being involved in doing extractions or mitigations for colonies that move into structures. They're typically referred to a local beekeeper. We get calls even occasionally from pest control companies that say a particular home has a colony of bees that have moved into a wall or something. Can a beekeeper please come out and quote the homeowner for the removal?
Huh.
So
Well,
it just doesn't kind of click correctly with me that the county or city is at all involved in doing extractions. And I think I've heard it quoted that there's either a state or federal regulation that says pest control companies are not supposed to exterminate bees. And it sounds sort of like what you're describing the city or county doing is extracting and destroying colonies, because that should probably be answered. Where do those colonies go when they're extracted?
Yeah.
My understanding in some of the Africanized areas that destruction is required.
Destruction is required?
I thought so. I thought in the I think in this might just be LA area, but they actually are required to destroy them now because of the fear of promoting the Africanized colonies.
Interesting.
I did stumble
It
across
is true that in LA County, you have to destroy bees, especially if they're aggressive. So it's areas with Africanized bees that extraction, destruction is required, especially in urban areas where there are a lot of houses, because the bees in LA can be very aggressive.
I did stumble across an article, I think in a scholarly journal, describing how bait hives could be set up and baited in such a way that they would kill the Africanized colonies that moved into them.
Interesting.
That's really interesting.
well, back to the
How do they differentiate?
back to the question to the Molly
By
of
location, I think.
all the feral bees. If it's gotta be somewhere, some part, it's gotta be studied somewhere, and there's some that move into the become a feral bees. I don't think they are all the feral bees to begin with. Just like I have noticed the past 5 years, I'm specifically taking care of my community, and in the beginning, like first year, 2018, there was a 5 swarm in about 3 months in a vicinity of one street, and they've turned out to be this beekeeper left his hive at the mother's house. He lives in Santa Cruz, and he comes once a year, collect the honey end of October. In the meantime, and all the bees were just keep on swarming. And then people finding out I catch a swarm, I take care of bees, and the people were telling me the stories one after the other, just about almost every week, telling me the story of and then later, bees were everywhere. The bees would continue to swarm every year. Nobody been done anything to it. I'm removed under the jacuzzi, under the eave, you name it. So after 5 years, I see less and less feral bees, and pretty much just hardly any. So I think
because you're catching them and managing them.
Yes, and then so those bees are feral bees. There's hardly any left in this area, seems to me. And even the bait hive, this year on a bait hive, I caught only one, and rest of them just non-existence anymore. So I don't know, either their bees were died or they're learning from it. But as far as I can see, those are the keep reduced. So again, it's the beekeeper's responsibility managing the bees, and also you're taking care of them in the area properly. Then they shouldn't have those feral bees at all. But that's just my take.
Yeah.
Well, I think Phil mentioned that he has not collected as many swarms in his swarm traps this year as he has in past years. The other thing is, maybe a crude way of putting it, is bees moving into your structure is a penalty for not having done maintenance on your structure to make sure that bees can't move in. And those places where the bees had moved into were the ones that were easy for them to move into, and now they've all been made bee proof.
Well, I would encourage them to try to get maybe some rebate or something for doing a proper air sealing and insulation job so that they can use less energy.
Look at that.
Yeah, bees don't move into walls that are full of
Nickie, I love your way of thinking. It's fantastic.
Yeah.
So, Molly, there's also you've got Jeremy Rose down there. Have you tried talking to him directly?
I cannot seem to find his contact information anywhere, and it's kind of ridiculous. Like, I see all these articles about how, oh, he's heading the bee program and he's doing all these amazing things, but I can't find his contact information.
I know somebody who has him come. He's a winemaker, and he has him come to his event every year. So I'm sure he knows his contact.
The other one is I was on the board of directors of the state beekeepers, and Mike Tomachuk, I'm not pronouncing his name right, but Tomachuk was the president at the time, and I believe Mike is actually referenced in Jeremy's book. He might be another person to get a hold of. That might be Mike himself might be a good resource for you. And he's a really nice guy. He's a commercial beekeeper, really nice guy. He'll real level-headed, which is unusual for a lot of commercial beekeepers.
Not so crunchy.
But nice guy, and if I remember right, he was actually referenced in Jeremy's book.
Okay. Okay, good to look into him too. Ooh, gotta get on it. Start writing emails.
If we get any info, we send it to you or to Sue, or how?
To me would be great. It's mollylee.oakland@gmail.com. Molly, Molly, Lee, Lee.
At Gmail.
Yep.
Okay.
That would be great.
Find out if we can find anything.
And then earlier in your talk, Nickie, you mentioned that you wrote the memo. I would love to see a copy of that, just for like a reference of what arguments you made and how you presented it, if you have a copy.
There's a lot of memos, but I'll give you a recent one.
Okay. Yeah.
Actually, you have one, Sue.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
But your initial one, because
no, actually, I have one for Foster City that kind of compiles it all into one. So I'll send you the Foster City one.
yeah, because she's starting with
Nothing.
yeah, from way back.
Yeah.
Okay.
Great. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, the point of those memos, because I think, Greg, you were asking about the memos or something. Do you start with a memo, or somebody said that? Anyway, so the point of the memo is basically to give the staff the information they need for their reports, so they don't have to spend so much time on their report.
Got it.
So
Making their
just
life
this is a
easier.
part of it, everything in there, you know, so Foster City figured out that they only needed 1 day of work after we did that.
Wow.
Amazing. Yeah. Just making their life easier makes the whole process smoother.
Thinkable.
Yeah.
Not unthinkable.
That's how it works for any public service work.
They want you to do it for them.
Yeah, you do it for them. You're right. That's how the corporations get their laws.
It's true. That is very correct.
Right.
Didn't think about it like that.
They didn't want us to do it in San Mateo, but now that we've kind of, you know, they see that we've got an approach that they like, they're starting to take our memos and go with it.
Cool. Awesome.
Okay.
Thank you all for all your advice. Really appreciate it.
Well, we'd love to hear how it goes, and
Yeah,
don't be a stranger.
I will not. I'll keep you updated. For sure. Is that it?
That's it for me.
Yeah.
This
Okay.
chicken needs to go to bed.
Me too.
We all do.
Yeah, it's kind of late. but,
Night, y'all.
Yep.
It was great talking with everyone. Thanks.
Well,
Nikki,
thank you
you
very
did a
much.
great job. That was a fantastic presentation.
Yeah.
Really
Okay, we can-
smooth.